It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but Mondays are for me to talk about monster movies. Let's get into some Native American folklore. This week's Monster Mondays will be taking a look at the 1978 horror film called The Manitou. It was produced and directed by William Girdler. He also has a screenplay credit on the film as well. After getting some notice for doing the gory Three on a Meat Hook in the early 70s, he went on to do a couple of popular blaxploitation flicks. Abby, which is, to put it mildly, the black version of The Exorcist, as well as the Pam Grier movie Sheba Baby. And if you know anything about me or have read any of my older B-Movie Enema blog entries, you have to realize that those are probably two movies I'd very much like to dig in a little bit deeper and write about them. I love blaxploitation films, and I've seen both of those movies too, and so I'd like to do a little bit more about those in the future as well. Now, The Manitou did turn out to be Girdler's biggest production in terms of being the most expensive, as well as a relative hit. Sadly, though, The Manitou would be Girdler's last film. While scouting for locations for his next film, he died in a helicopter accident just 3 months before the release of The Manitou. I don't want to sound cynical, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised if that helped this film's box office. Posthumous movies tend to do well for actors and directors. That being said, Girdler did recruit a pretty great cast, so it may have simply been a movie that was destined to do somewhat well in theaters anyway. The Manitou stars Tony Curtis and Susan Strasberg. However, you also have a handful of good character actors like Michael Ansara, who was Cochise on TV's Broken Arrow and was also on Buck Rogers. Stella Stevens has a supporting role, but maybe most recognizable is Burgess Meredith playing Dr. Snow. This was definitely during Meredith's renaissance after Rocky, when he'd show up in several movies as a supporting character. This is a strong cast that wasn't totally unnoticed by some of the more positive reviews the film had over the years. Now, all that's great, but let's talk about the creature at the center of this movie, the Manitou. The Manitou was an elemental life force that was known to several of the Algonquian groups of Native Americans. This group was mostly northern dwellers encompassing almost the entire eastern half of Canada, with some patches in the Rockies, the U.S. Midwest, and New England. Basically, there are two kinds of Manitou. There's a good spirit, or the Asha Manitou, and the bad side, or the Ochi Manitou. Basically, when the world was created, the great spirit of Asha Manitou gave the land to the indigenous people, and the Shawnee in particular. Now, I posit, though, that this is such an elemental force in how religions work for several groups of these people that it actually finds its way into our collective pop culture consciousness as well. How so? Well, the Manitou is split between the good and the bad. It is the fundamental force of all things. It manifests everywhere within organisms, environment. It is present in various events. It causes events, and so forth. I think you probably already know where I'm going with this. Yep, it's the great sky god that the native people worshipped in the third season episode of Star Trek called the Paradise Syndrome. Nah, I'm just kidding you. It sounds an awful lot like Star Wars Force that has a good side and a bad side. It's a surrounding thing that lives inside of everything and binds everything together. You may notice that a lot of Eastern religion and philosophy, as well as indigenous religions here in North America, often seem to have that full nature scope of how everything is balanced and bound to each other, as opposed to Western religion. It is certainly that sort of stuff that fuels mystical fantasy, even in a galaxy far, far away. Also, if you ever wondered where Manitoba got its name, well, now you know. It's from the Manitou. The movie opens with Karen Tandy, played by Strasberg, getting checked out for a tumor on the back of her neck. As the doctors study x-rays, they shift from believing it is a tremendously fast-growing malignant tumor to believing it is actually a fetus growing inside of her neck. We then meet Harry Erskine, and he's played by Tony Curtis. He's a bit of a flamboyant shyster of mystical stuffs. He reads fortunes, hands out goofy mantras, etc. Karen calls him to meet, and these two had a romantic relationship in the past and haven't connected in a while. Now, she tells him about her growth. After they spend the day and the night together, he reads her cards, and each time he does it, basically all the worst tarot cards are turned over. He's also especially concerned when he hears her whisper in a foreign language in her sleep. When she has her tumor operated on, the tumor causes her to chant a spell and causes the doctor operating on her to cut himself instead. Additionally, when reading the cards for an elderly regular customer, Erskine's customer has a particularly adverse reaction when he pulls the death card. The old lady begins chanting and dancing before literally floating away and down the stairs, killing her. He goes to see the tumor doctor who had been seeing Karen and tells him about the weird shit going on around them. And the doctor doesn't really buy into the idea that something more mystical is going on. And he doesn't even explain the weirdness that happened in the operating room. However, he does buy into the idea that there is a baby forming on the back of her neck. And if they remove it, it will likely kill Karen. Now, Harry gets some advice from an old black magic friend of his, and she says the only way to know what is going on is to have a seance in Karen's home. And boy, does that work. As a woman at the seance goes into a trance, she calls forth the head of a really scary guy from what appears to be a goopy tar in the middle of the table. But they aren't able to get an answer from the being on what he wants or what's going on. However, it does blow the door open and causes a gale force wind to blow into the house, knocking them all over and scaring the bejesus out of everyone. Now, they do all agree that the image of that scary guy looked an awful lot like a wooden Indian that stands out in front of general stores. They also agree that he must have had a powerful knowledge of dark magics. They head off to talk to Burgess Meredith, an expert in Native American anthropology. However, he's not an expert in black magic, only the legend of a shaman who was reborn through a tumor on a woman's arm. Now, if theoretically Karen does have a shaman trying to get born again through her neck, they aren't dealing with magic. They're dealing with the old god stuff. It's more than they have any idea of how to deal with. He does translate the saying that Karen chanted in her sleep as well as what that old lady said before she threw herself down the stairs. It basically says something to the effect of, "My death foretold my return." Ultimately, the suggestion is to bring another medicine man to fight back the one that's coming out of Karen's neck. Karen's doctor is not having any of this. In fact, they're going to try removing it with a laser, except the laser goes haywire and starts trying to kill the doctors and the nurses and everybody in the operating room. Karen's reaction to all of this, and the doctor clearly seeing that the laser is basically operating itself, it's maybe time to go get that medicine man. And so they find John Singing Rock, who's played by Ansara. Now, Singing Rock says that this is a cycle that grows more and more powerful each time this happens. The power it would take to make the Manitou go away would be something that is nearly impossible. He does give consent, but with a price. He has to wait 3 days before taking the job, and he will do it for a $100,000 donation to the Indian Education Fund and some tobacco to replenish his stash. When Singing Rock discovers that the Manitou growing in Karen is Miskamachus, who was the greatest of all medicine men, he gets a little concerned. And if he's able to defeat him, she will live. If he loses, Karen will die, but will also be the least painful of all the death that will come. Singing Rock will get it worse for helping the white man. After Miscamachus strips an orderly of his skin in a particularly gruesome scene, Singing Rock realizes it's time to do battle because the shaman is getting reborn. He comes out of Karen's back, but Singing Rock is able to hold him off temporarily. He remains entrapped in a circle, but he's able to reanimate the skinned orderly to do some bad shit for him. Singing Rock is able to unanimate the orderly, but Miscamachus is growing in power. He's able to break the circle, and he's also able to summon demons. While Harry is helping an injured doctor get to safety, the Manitou attacks Singing Rock and escapes, and then freezes the entire floor that Karen's room is on, even freezing a nurse solid to the point that her head falls off when he uses some wind powers against our heroes. As the Manitou escapes, he begins summoning the Great Old One. That's basically the equivalent to Satan. Harry comes up with an idea that might just work or backfire horrifically. As Singing Rock explained earlier, everything has a Manitou in it. Everything is bound together. So if they take all the stuff inside the hospital and use those Manitous to fight Miscamachus, they might be able to fight him off. Well, it doesn't really quite work. The machines in the hospital are white man's magic. It just ends up causing Karen's doctor to literally fucking explode. So Harry decides to have some words with Miscamachus. That brings the Manitous from the hospital computers to funnel through Karen, and she destroys both Miscamachus and the Great Old One with lasers from her hands and a lot of special effects. This movie's a trip, man, as you could probably tell there. Let's get to the three things I like about the Manitou. Now, for anyone who just joined this series in midstream, Monster Mondays is all about positivity. Every movie I watch, no matter the quality, I list three things that I like. Now, with the Manitou, I'm just going to start real easy with the general story. It's not unusual to have a story about a woman giving birth to something evil. That's happened a lot, especially since Rosemary's Baby. But normally, they are born or threatened to be born in normal ways, not through a lady's back, or I guess more accurately, the back of her neck. It definitely makes for a much more mystical situation. And throughout history, there's all sorts of legends about body horror. The Greeks had all sorts of body horror stuff, usually based on gods being real dick to mortals. Second, the big moment of Miscamachus being reborn is really pretty gross. For one, he's coming out of a rubbery membrane that is essentially a lady's back. He's also full-sized, but all gooey and deformed. What's even better is that Singing Rock is able to hold him back, but Miscamachus just stands there, menacingly. It becomes a countdown to when the little monster will gain his full power, and it is pretty unsettling to see that guy just standing there, still, and just staring. Sometimes doing other creepy shit too. It's a pretty good payoff when he finally shows up in the movie, I guess, or gets born into the movie. Now, finally, I actually like the Native American element of this. Singing Rock in particular is kind of a third act character, but he makes some pretty damn decent points about how maybe he shouldn't help the white man. He doesn't want their sympathy or their money. He just wants his people to not be messed with anymore. And that's pretty fair. In fact, the bulk of his payment is to be sent to a group of people who can use it better than he can, and also to enrich their lives. And it's not really there to make his life better. Now, the tobacco, I guess, is nice, but yeah, he wants the young Native American kids to get more out of it. Additionally, the magics in play here are well beyond what you normally see in supernatural stories. As Singing Rock explains, you can't really call the cops to stop a Manitou because the Manitou is in everything. Each cop will be bound to the Manitou. Every bullet in every gun, all of it has a Manitou in it. It serves as a thing that prevents calling on some things that would really kind of help them out. but ultimately does turn out to be the solution needed to win. Two final notes I will make about the Manitou. There are lots of things I could say about the final act because, oh boy, it kicks itself into utter overdrive in the big climax, which includes a guy literally blowing up. It also includes a naked Susan Strasberg fighting an evil shaman and devil with lasers from her hands. It's got Native American magic ultimately needing white people to defeat their own supernatural thing. It's almost a movie that you have to see to believe. It's just bonkers. At the very, very end, there's a statement of fact that in 1969, a teenage boy in Tokyo was brought to the hospital with what appeared to be a tumor, but did end up being an actual fetus. Just to top every other crazy thing in this movie, it just drops that little fact there for you at the end of you just watched a super crazy movie. And we're just going to drop this little even crazier fact at the very end. Well, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later. And don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday.